My name is Holly Grant, and I never imagined that trusting my own parents would cost me the one thing I worked my whole life to build. After years of saving, I finally bought a small apartment in Brooklyn. For the first time, it felt like freedom, like something in this world truly belonged to me. Then one weekend, they showed up with warm smiles and careful advice, and I made a decision that changed everything. Have you ever trusted someone without question? That dinner started like any other Friday night. The windows were open, letting in the soft hum of Brooklyn traffic, and the smell of roasted garlic drifted from the kitchen. My parents had offered to bring food to celebrate my first few months in the apartment. I told myself it was sweet, supportive, a sign they were proud of me. When they arrived, Elise and her husband Craig came with them, carrying a bottle of wine and a pie that looked suspiciously store-bought. Elise swept into the room like she always did, polished, composed, smiling just a second too long. Craig followed with that relaxed confidence that never quite reached his eyes. We squeezed around my small dining table knees, nearly touching. At first, it felt normal. My father asked about work, and I told him about the hotel lobby project I was designing in Manhattan. My mother complimented the curtains, wondering aloud if I'd remembered to use the old family fabric discount. It was all familiar, almost comforting. But then Craig set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. You know, he said casually, swirling his wine-owning property in New York is a big deal. Lots of risks people don't think about. Taxes, lawsuits, unexpected issues. The air shifted, just slightly. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Before I could respond, my father leaned forward, elbows on the table. Craig's right. You're new to this. It's easy to overlook certain protections. My mother nodded, softly, her voice gentle, almost soothing. We've been talking about this, sweetheart. Maybe you should consider transferring the apartment into our names. Just temporarily, for safety. The words sounded careful, measured, as if they'd been rehearsed. I laughed lightly, trying to keep the mood easy. Transfer it. Why would I need to do that? I pay my taxes. I have insurance. My father smiled the way he used to when I questioned him as a teenager, patient, indulgent. It's not about what you're doing wrong. It's about what could happen. One mistake, one unexpected situation, and everything you worked for could disappear. Craig raised his glass, long-term thinking. That's all this is. Family should help each other, right? That line hung in the air. Elise hadn't said much. She just sat there, swirling her wine, slowly watching me over the rim of her glass. There was a faint smile on her lips, but it didn't match the softness in her eyes. It felt like she already knew something I didn't. I'm not sure that's necessary, I said carefully. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was warm, familiar. We're only trying to protect you, Holly. Don't you trust us? That question landed heavier than anything else they'd said. Don't you trust us? It wasn't about paperwork anymore. It wasn't about taxes or liability. It was about loyalty, about being a good daughter. I looked around the table. My father's steady gaze. My mother's soft concern. Craig's calm curiosity. Elise's quiet, unreadable expression. 4 sets of eyes waiting. I tried to gather my thoughts, but they tangled under the weight of expectation. Was I being paranoid? Ungrateful? They weren't asking to move in. They weren't asking for money. Just a temporary transfer, a shield, not a takeover. That way my father continued smoothly if anything happens. The property stays protected within the family. You still live here. Nothing changes. Nothing changes. Craig nodded as if the matter was already settled. We'd handle the paperwork, make it simple. There was something about how easily they spoke. Like the decision had already been made and I was just catching up. I glanced at Elise again. For a split second, her smile widened. Not warmly, not reassuringly, just knowingly. A flicker of unease ran through me. Why did this feel less like advice and more like a plan? The room suddenly seemed smaller, the ceiling lower. The laughter from earlier had faded, replaced by the faint clinking of silverware against plates. Even the city noise outside felt distant. Just think about it, my father said, leaning back as if he were being generous. No rush. But it didn't feel like there was no rush. It felt like a test. Like my answer would reveal something about me. Elise finally spoke as they gathered their coats later that night. She hugged me quickly, her perfume sharp and sweet. "You're lucky," she whispered. "Not everyone has parents who care this much." Lucky. After they left, I stood alone in the quiet apartment. The wine glasses were half empty. Craig's fingerprints still smudged the glass in front of his chair. The garlic scent had faded, replaced by something colder, heavier. I walked to the window and looked out at the streetlights below. A place that had felt like freedom only hours earlier now felt fragile. I replayed the conversation over and over. Protecting assets, temporary transfer. Families should help each other. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was overthinking it. They were my parents. They'd always made decisions for me. Maybe this was just another one. And yet, something about Elise's silence, something about Craig's timing, something about the way my father had said the property should stay within the family. A thin thread of doubt tightened in my chest. I couldn't name it. I couldn't prove it. But as I locked the door and turned off the lights, I had the strangest feeling that the dinner hadn't been a celebration at all. It had been the opening move of something I didn't fully understand yet. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a leather chair that felt too large for me inside a lawyer's office that smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. The blinds were half closed, slicing the morning light into narrow strips across the desk. Everything looked orderly, controlled, safe. My parents sat across from me, relaxed, almost cheerful. My father's hands rested confidently on the armrests. My mother kept smoothing the edge of her purse the way she did when she believed something important was about to go exactly as planned. "This is very routine," my father said, as if we were discussing dinner reservations instead of ownership of my home. "Families do this all the time." The lawyer, Mr. Green, smiled warmly when he greeted me. But as he spoke, I noticed something subtle. His eyes drifted toward my parents, more than toward me. "The transfer is temporary," he explained in a smooth, practiced tone. "A precautionary measure. It protects the asset from potential tax complications or unforeseen liabilities. Very common, very common." The papers were already laid out neatly on the desk. Sticky tabs marked each place where I was supposed to sign. It felt less like a discussion and more like a ceremony that had been prepared in advance. My stomach tightened. "It's only on paper," my mother said, gently leaning forward. "Nothing changes. You still live there. You still make the payments? We're just safeguarding it. Safeguarding, my father added. One day you'll thank us. That line stayed with me. I picked up the first page and tried to read it carefully. The words swam together, legal phrasing, long sentences, paragraphs that sounded protective but felt distant. Every clause seemed harmless on its own, logical, responsible. Still, something inside me resisted. Can I review everything I asked, trying to keep my voice steady? My father chuckled lightly, like I'd just asked if water was wet. Of course. But it's all standard language. We've already gone over it. Not I, not me. Mr. Green nodded politely. Take your time. I skimmed again, though I could feel the room waiting for me to move faster. My parents exchanged small glances, quick, subtle, almost invisible. The kind people share when they believe things are proceeding exactly as expected. Mr. Green stepped out briefly to take a phone call, leaving the three of us alone. The silence was thick. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, my fingers moving almost without permission. I opened my messages and typed to Lacey. They want me to sign ownership papers. It's supposed to be temporary. Is that normal? Her response came faster than I expected. Be careful. Add a clause that lets you revoke the transfer if they misuse it. Trust me. I stared at the screen. A clause. It felt strange, almost disloyal to think I needed protection from my own parents. But the unease that had been whispering inside me since that dinner grew louder. When Mr. Green returned, I cleared my throat. Actually, I said, offering a small smile, I'd feel more comfortable if we added one line. All three of them looked at me. What kind of line? My father asked casually. Too casually. A clause that allows me to revoke the transfer within 60 days if the property is used for any purpose outside the original intent. There it was, out in the open. For a split second, something flickered across my mother's face. Surprise, irritation. It vanished almost immediately. Mr. Green raised an eyebrow. That's unusual, he admitted, but not unreasonable. My father laughed again, though the warmth had thinned. She gets that from me. Always cautious. But I noticed the quick glance he shared with my mother. A silent calculation. If it gives you peace of mind, Mr. Green. Continued, already reaching for his pen. We can include it. He wrote the clause into the final paragraph in small, precise handwriting. I leaned forward and read it carefully. Every word. Slowly. Transfer of ownership may be revoked within 60 days should the property be used for any purpose outside of the originally stated intent. It looked small, almost insignificant, but it felt like oxygen. Does that satisfy you? My father asked. Satisfy? I nodded. When Mr. Green handed me the pen, my hand trembled. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't visible to anyone but me. But I felt it right down to my fingertips. I signed the first page, then the second. Each signature felt heavier than the last, like I was carving something permanent into stone. My name repeated at the bottom of every page, looping and binding. My father tapped the table lightly in approval. My mother adjusted her purse again, her expression serene. When the final page was signed, Mr. Green stamped the document. The sharp thud of the stamp echoed in the room. It sounded final. My mother stood and hugged me. Now everything will be easier, she whispered. Easier for who? Outside the city, noise rushed toward me like a wave when we stepped onto the sidewalk. My parents chatted about lunch plans as if we'd just completed a routine errand. I walked a few steps behind them, clutching my copy of the folder to my chest. On the subway ride home, I opened it again. I stared at my own signatures, over and over. My handwriting looked foreign, like it belonged to someone braver or more naive. When I reached my apartment, I placed the folder on the kitchen table and just stood there. The room looked the same. The sunlight hit the walls the same way. The air carried the same faint scent of coffee. Nothing changes, my mother had said. And technically she was right, but something had shifted. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in the office. My father's confidence, my mother's soft persuasion, Mr. Green's polished reassurances, and that tiny clause. Around midnight, I got up and pulled the folder from my desk again. I sat at the kitchen table reading each page slowly, tracing the lines with my finger. There it was, near the bottom of page 6, small, almost invisible among the dense paragraphs. The 60-day revocation clause, a single sentence, a thread I hadn't completely surrendered. I read it again and again. It didn't erase the weight of what I'd signed. It didn't undo the fact that my name was no longer the only one tied to my home. But it gave me something quiet, a door that wasn't fully closed. As dawn began to soften the edges of the sky outside my window, I finally set the papers down. I didn't know yet why I felt so unsettled. I didn't know what would come next. But as I watched the light creep across the floor, I had the strange, persistent feeling that that small sentence, the one I almost hadn't added, was going to matter more than anyone in that office realized. 2 months later, my parents hosted a party to celebrate their 30th wedding anniversary. Their house in Queens looked almost magical that evening. Gold balloons floated near the ceiling. Candles flickered along the dining table. Framed photos, new wedding portraits, childhood snapshots, carefully preserved milestones were arranged, like proof of a long, successful love story. For a moment, I let myself believe that's all it was. A celebration. A simple family gathering where laughter would soften the edges of everything that had been building quietly beneath the surface. Relatives filled the living room, voices overlapping in warm conversation. The air smelled of catered food and my mother's floral perfume. My father stood near the entryway, greeting guests with his booming confidence, shaking hands like a politician working a room. My mother moved between tables, adjusting centerpieces glowing under the compliments. If you didn't know better, you'd think this was a family built on devotion. I arrived early and helped arrange flowers. My mother smiled at me, brushing imaginary lint from my sleeve. "You look beautiful tonight," she said. Her tone was tender, almost proud. For a second, I wanted to believe it. Then, Elise and Craig arrived late, just as dessert was being set out. The front door opened and conversation dipped for a heartbeat. Elise stepped in, wearing a fitted ivory dress, her hair styled perfectly, her smile polished and deliberate. Craig followed with that effortless, self-assured posture, carrying a small wrapped box like a ceremonial offering. My mother's face brightened noticeably when she saw them. My father clapped Craig on the shoulder as if welcoming a favorite son. I felt something small twist inside me. Dinner moved along with speeches and clinking glasses. Guests reminisced about how my parents met, how they struggled through their first tiny apartment, how their love endured through every hardship. The stories were well rehearsed, told with timing and charm. Elise dominated much of the conversation, casually mentioning new beginnings and big plans ahead, though she never explained what those plans were. My mother watched her with shining eyes. My father laughed at Craig's jokes as though they were brilliant. I sat quietly, smiling when expected, nodding at the right moments. But the longer the evening stretched, the more I felt like a guest in my own family. When dessert plates were cleared and fresh wine poured, my father stood. He didn't need to raise his voice. The room naturally settled when he cleared his throat. 30 years he began his tone steady and commanding. Not everyone makes it this far. Applause rippled through the room. He wrapped an arm around my mother's shoulders. We've built a life together. A home, a family. More applause, a few sentimental sighs. Family is everything, he continued. What we build shouldn't just belong to us. It should stay within the family. It should support the next generation. I listened politely, assuming this was just the emotional part of the speech. The sentimental closing line before everyone returned to coffee and polite gossip. But then his tone shifted, subtly. And that's why we've made a decision about the future. The air thinned. We've decided to give Holly's apartment to Elise and Craig. For a split second, the room didn't react at all. It was as if the words hadn't landed yet. Then a few awkward claps started, uncertain, hesitant. People glanced at one another, trying to gauge the appropriate response. My ears rang. I stared at him, waiting for clarification, waiting for him to correct himself, to laugh, to say he misspoke. He didn't. His smile remained steady. My mother's eyes shimmered, not with surprise, but with satisfaction. Elise gasped theatrically, pressing her hand to her chest, as if she'd just been given an unexpected blessing. Craig leaned back in his chair, his grin slow and triumphant. He covered Elise's hand with his own, like a man accepting a prize he'd known was coming. My throat went dry. What did you say? I heard myself ask. The words barely carried across the table. My father turned toward me with that same calm, instructional tone he'd used my entire life. It's only fair, Holly. They're starting a family. Your apartment is under our name now. We thought it would be the perfect gift. The words scraped against my ribs. You're giving them my home? I asked louder this time. My mother reached for my arm, her touch, soft but firm. Sweetheart, it's not personal. Elise has been through a lot. She deserves support. Deserves. I looked at Elise. Her expression had settled into something smug, almost luminous with victory. The earlier silence at the dinner table weeks ago suddenly made sense. The faint smile, the knowing glance. This wasn't spontaneous. This was choreography. The speech about family, the emphasis on keeping things within it, the dramatic reveal in front of witnesses. They had planned this. Every reassurance in the lawyer's office, every soft promise that nothing would change, every careful word about protection. It had all led here. Around us, guests avoided direct eye contact, but couldn't stop staring. Some whispered quietly, others forced polite smiles, unsure whether they were witnessing generosity or something deeply uncomfortable. My father raised his glass again, cutting through the tension. To family, to love, to new beginnings. Glasses clinked. The sound felt hollow. I felt heat rise to my face, but my hands were cold. My chest tightened, breath shallow and uneven. It was as if the room had shrunk, pressing in from every side. I searched my father's face for doubt. There was none, only certainty. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a clean, quiet fracture. I wasn't being protected. I wasn't being included. I was being repositioned. Elise leaned toward Craig, whispering something that made him smirk. Her diamond ring caught the candlelight flashing like a signal. I realized then that I had never been part of this decision. I had simply been the mechanism that made it possible. The daughter with the asset, after the speech conversations resumed in a strained, artificial way. People lined up to congratulate Elise and Craig. My mother hugged guests at the door, her laughter ringing out brightly as if nothing unusual had happened. No one congratulated me. I sat frozen for a few minutes longer, staring at the untouched wine in my glass. I could have argued. I could have shouted. I could have demanded they explain themselves in front of everyone. But something told me that was exactly what they expected, that I'd look emotional, unstable, ungrateful. Instead, I stood slowly. The room tilted slightly, but I kept my posture steady. No one tried to stop me as I walked toward the door. The night air hit my face like cold water. I stepped onto the sidewalk and stood there staring at the warmly lit windows of the house. Behind me, inside, shadows moved against curtains. Laughter drifted faintly through the glass. From the outside, it looked like a perfect family celebration. I wrapped my arms around myself, though I wasn't sure if I was cold or just empty. The word gift echoed in my mind. Not personal, my mother had said, but it was personal. It had always been personal. The careful glances at dinner, the smooth explanations at the lawyer's office, the theatrical announcement in front of witnesses. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a strategy, and I had walked straight into it. As I began walking down the quiet Queen Street, my heels clicking softly against the pavement, one realization settled over me with frightening clarity. I had never been the daughter they were celebrating. I had been the resource they were redistributing. The house behind me glowed warmly against the dark sky. But for the first time in my life, I understood just how cold family could feel. I didn't sleep for 3 nights after the anniversary party. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father lifting his glass. I heard the word gift echoing across the dining room. I saw Elise's hand resting over Craig's like they'd just won something. On the 3rd night, sometime past 2 in the morning, I gave up on pretending rest would come. I walked into the living room, opened my desk drawer, and pulled out the folder. The same folder I had stared at weeks earlier. My hands were steady now. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because the hurt had hardened into something sharper. I spread the papers across the table and began reading slowly. Not skimming this time. Not trusting summaries, every clause, every sentence. Page 1, page 2, page 3. Then page 6. There it was. Transfer of ownership may be revoked within 60 days should the property be used for any purpose outside of the originally stated intent. I read it again. 60 days. My breath caught not in panic, but in recognition. They had announced the gift. Publicly. Clearly. The apartment was no longer being safeguarded. It was being reassigned. They had stepped outside the stated intent, which meant I hadn't surrendered everything after all. For the first time since that dinner in Queens, I felt something other than betrayal. I felt possibility. The next morning, instead of going to work, I searched for a new attorney. Not someone my father trusted, not someone who glanced at my parents for approval before answering me. I found a small firm in Midtown Neal and Associates. The office was modest. No heavy wood panels, no rehearsed charm. When I walked in, the man who greeted me, Neil, looked directly at me when he spoke. I handed him the documents without dramatics. I explained what had happened, carefully, fact by fact. The dinner, the transfer, the speech. He didn't interrupt. He read in silence, turning each page slowly, his finger tracing the lines. When he reached page 6, he paused. A small shift in his expression. "You added this," he said. "Yes." He leaned back in his chair. "That was very smart." The word smart felt foreign after weeks of feeling foolish. "This clause gives you full authority to revoke the transfer," he continued. "If they've publicly declared an intent to gift the property to third parties, they've violated the original terms. So I can stop them." He gave a small nod. "You can do more than that. You can reclaim full ownership immediately." I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I exhaled. A long, steady breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. By noon, we had prepared a notarized statement invoking the revocation clause. Neil handled the filing with the county clerk himself. He drafted legal notice to my parents and to Elise and Craig. It was all surprisingly straightforward. Paperwork, signatures, official stamps. This time when I signed my name, my hand didn't tremble. The pen felt like an anchor. By late afternoon, Neil forwarded me confirmation the transfer had been legally reversed. The apartment was mine again. I sat at my kitchen table and let the silence settle around me. Technically, I had won something, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like clarity. Every corner of that apartment now held a memory layered with manipulation. The dining table where they first floated the idea. The desk where I reread the contract at midnight. The doorway where I had stood wondering if I was paranoid. The space still belonged to me, but it no longer felt like home. That's when the next decision came, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. "I want to sell," I told Neil the following morning. He didn't question it. "If you want it done quickly and quietly, I can arrange that." "I do." This wasn't revenge. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I just didn't want to keep living inside a place that had become a symbol of conditional love. Within 48 hours, Neil introduced me to a young couple, Daniel and Mia. They had just moved to New York, eyes wide with that mix of fear and hope that only the city can give you. When they stepped into the apartment, sunlight poured through the windows like it had on the first day I saw it. "This light," Mia whispered, walking toward the balcony. Daniel asked about the neighborhood. Coffee shops, schools, the subway lines. They weren't calculating. They were dreaming. Watching them, something inside me softened. They saw what I had once seen a beginning. The sale moved quickly. Papers signed, funds transferred. Ownership changed this time permanently. Neil handled every detail discreetly. There would be no early warning. No chance for interference. The morning after the closing, I began packing. Boxes lined the walls, books stacked neatly, dishes wrapped in newspaper. I moved slowly through each room. The kitchen where I used to drink coffee before work, believing independence meant safety. The living room where I'd once felt proud to host my first dinner as a homeowner. The small balcony where I had stood, watching the city breathe at night, thinking I had built something unshakable. Everything looked the same, but it felt lighter. Not because I was escaping something, because I was choosing something. When the apartment was nearly empty, I stood in the center of the living room and let the quiet stretch out around me. This place had taught me more than I ever expected. Not about real estate, about boundaries. I picked up the keys and held them for a moment longer than necessary. Then I placed them inside an envelope for Neil to deliver. At the door, I hesitated. There's a strange kind of grief in leaving something you fought to keep. I locked it anyway. The click echoed softly down the hallway. As I walked toward the elevator, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel broken. I felt free. Outside, the Brooklyn air was cool and sharp against my face. The building stood behind me, quiet and indifferent, already belonging to someone else's story. I walked several blocks before I allowed myself to turn around. The windows reflected the sky, offering no trace of what had happened inside. And for the first time since that dinner in Queens, the tightness in my chest loosened. I hadn't reclaimed the apartment just to hold on to it. I had reclaimed my choice. And sometimes that's the only thing worth keeping. The confrontation began just before noon when the receptionist's polite voice cracked over the intercom. "Holly, your family is here. Not visiting, not stopping by. Here." Through the glass wall of her office, Holly saw them storm past the lobby chairs, her mother first, rigid with fury. Her father, red-faced and tight-jawed. Elise in towering heels, mascara already smudged. And Craig trailing behind, his usual smug composure replaced with something desperate and brittle. The entire floor went quiet. Her mother didn't wait to be invited in. She shoved the door open so hard it rebounded against the stopper. "How could you?" she demanded. No greeting, no explanation, just accusation. Holly stayed seated. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind. But now that it was here, she felt something unexpected. Calm. Not cold. Not triumphant. Simply steady. "I reversed the transfer," she said evenly. "Legally, within the 60 days. Her father stepped forward, his voice booming. "That apartment was a gift to this family." "No," Holly replied. "It was mine." Elise let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You humiliated us. You let us move forward with plans. You let everyone believe." "I let you believe what you told yourselves," Holly interrupted softly. Craig finally spoke. "You sold it out from under us." "Yes." The word hung in the air like a final stamp. Her mother's voice cracked. "Shifting tactics. After everything we've done for you." There it was, the familiar pivot from anger to emotional debt. Holly felt the old reflex to apologize flicker in her chest, but it didn't take hold. "You announced my home as a gift without telling me," she said, in front of a room full of people. "You embarrassed your sister," her father shot back. "No," Holly said quietly. "You did." The shouting escalated quickly after that. Elise began pacing, her voice rising, accusing Holly of sabotage, of jealousy, of spite. Craig tried to frame it as a miscommunication, but his volume betrayed him. Employees had stopped pretending not to watch. The receptionist whispered something into the phone. When Holly stood, she didn't raise her voice. She simply pressed the security button beneath her desk. Within minutes, building security arrived, 2 uniformed guards, who stepped in with calm, practiced authority. "Ma'am, sir, you need to lower your voices. This is a family matter," her father barked. "And you're disrupting a workplace," one guard replied evenly. Her mother pointed at Holly. "Tell them to leave us alone." Holly looked at the guard. "They're not authorized visitors." The words were precise, controlled. That seemed to enrage Elise most of all. "You're calling security on your own family. I'm protecting my workplace." Craig moved toward the desk as if proximity might intimidate her. One of the guards stepped between them. "Sir, back up." Her father's voice boomed again, drawing more attention from neighboring offices. Someone in the hallway had already started recording. By the time the police arrived, 2 officers, responding to a disturbance call, the energy had shifted from outrage to spectacle. The officers separated them, asking questions in clipped tones. "Is this a civil property dispute?" "Yes," Holly answered. "Did you legally sell the property?" "Yes." "Do you feel threatened?" She hesitated only a second. "I feel harassed." Her mother gasped like she'd been slapped. Elise began crying loudly now, theatrically insisting they'd been betrayed. Craig muttered about lawyers and consequences. Her father demanded the officers make her fix it. But the officers were unmoved. "This is a civil issue," one of them repeated. "You'll need to resolve it through legal channels. Right now, you need to leave." Security escorted them out. Through the glass wall, Holly watched her father resist, just slightly before yielding. Elise turned once more, her expression venomous and stunned all at once. Craig avoided eye contact entirely. The elevator doors closed. The office exhaled. But the incident didn't end there. By evening, the video had surfaced online. 30 seconds of shouting, her father's booming voice, Elise's accusation, Craig's frustrated gestures, the officer's calm removal. It spread faster than anyone expected. Craig's employers saw it. Clients saw it. Within days, whispers turned into formal review. A week later, he was quietly let go. Elise's social media spiraled first. Defensive posts about family betrayal, then angry rants, then tearful live streams that only fueled more scrutiny. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations stopped. Her parents, once proud hosts of community gatherings, found themselves fielding uncomfortable questions. The anniversary speech about unity resurfaced in comment threads. Hypocrisy became the word people used most. Holly did not respond publicly. She did not gloat. She went to work, she met deadlines, she kept her head down. When the 3rd unannounced visit attempt happened, this time blocked at the building entrance, she met with her attorney. Filing the restraining order felt less dramatic than she expected. It was paperwork, dates, descriptions, documentation of disruption. Necessary, protective, venal. As she signed that document, there was no surge of revenge. No satisfaction in their unraveling. Only clarity. Actions had consequences. And for the first time, those consequences weren't hers to carry. The new apartment was smaller. Not temporary small, intentional small. It sat on a quiet, tree-lined street in Brooklyn, 3 subway stops farther than she used to commute. The windows faced a courtyard instead of a skyline. No dramatic sunsets. No glittering view to impress guests. Just brick ivy and a single stubborn maple tree that rattled in the wind. It felt safe. The first morning she woke there, she noticed the silence. No anxious checking of her phone. No waiting for an email from a lawyer. No replaying arguments in her head. Just quiet. She built her routines slowly, like laying down stones in a path she could trust. Coffee by the window. A short walk before work. Evenings without television. Just soft music and the sound of her own thoughts settling. The easel came out of storage first. For years, painting had been something she did in stolen hours. Something indulgent. Something she apologized for enjoying. Now, she set it up in the corner without justification. The first canvas stayed blank for days. She wasn't sure what she wanted to say. When color finally touched it, it wasn't angry. It wasn't chaotic. It was layered, muted blues, soft golds, a horizon line barely visible. Steady. She began writing again, too. Not posts, not statements, just private pages in a notebook. Fragments about memory, about silence, about the difference between love and obligation. One weekend, Lacey came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. They sat cross-legged on the floor because Holly hadn't bought a couch yet. Lacey looked around the apartment, smiling gently. "It feels like you," she said. Holly hadn't realized how long it had been since a space truly felt that way. They didn't dissect the past much. There was no need. Lacey had stood beside her through every legal meeting, every sleepless night. Her support had been quiet, steady, unquestioning. At one point, Lacey asked softly, "Do you forgive them?" Holly thought about it. "I don't know," she said, honestly, "but I don't need to." Peace, she had learned, wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't pretending nothing happened. It wasn't reconciliation without accountability. Peace was protection. Peace was changing the locks, literally and emotionally. Peace was no longer explaining herself to people who had never really listened. She had spent years believing family meant endurance, that loyalty meant self-erasure, that love required sacrifice without limit. Now she understood something simpler. Boundaries weren't cruelty, they were self-respect. There were moments she missed the idea of them, the dinners, the shared jokes, the imagined future holidays. But when she examined those memories closely, she saw how much of it had been performance, expectation, control wrapped in affection. One evening, standing by the window as the courtyard lights flickered on, she felt the grief settle into something manageable. She hadn't lost a family. She had lost an illusion. And in its place, she had gained something far more honest herself. Thank you for spending this time with Holly's story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose self-respect over family expectations, I'd love to hear your experience in the comments. These conversations matter. Healing takes courage, and boundaries are often the quietest, bravest choice we make. If stories about growth after betrayal speak to you, consider liking and subscribing. There's more here about finding strength, clarity, and peace on your own terms.